The Closing of the American Mind by Allan Bloom, the perhaps surprising bestseller from the 1980s, which has been called the first shot in the culture wars. This book caused something of a stir back when it was published in, I think, 1987. Allan Bloom, if you don't know, was a professor. And in this book, The Closing of the American Mind, he takes a pretty critical look at the state of American higher education and its relationship to American culture and society more broadly, and the negative effects that he asserts that the current state, or I guess the then current state of American higher education has had upon America as a nation. So I had been somewhat familiar with this book for some time, but recently I came across this copy in a flea market. So I picked it up on the cheap, and I was like, I'm going to read that book. I'm going to see what it has to say. I'm going to see what it's all about. And having done so now, I have to say this is a book which I can certainly respect, but which I don't think I can say that I really enjoyed, but I will try to explain myself as best I can. So the book is divided into different sections. There's also like an introduction kind of, but it's divided mainly into like three main sections entitled Students, Nihilism, American Style, and the University. And in the first section, Students, Bloom provides basically anecdotal experiences of his own, which he uses as evidence to illustrate that modern American students are by and large not particularly robust intellectually. They're often kind of clueless. They're shallow, somewhat dull, he would say. They have no real interest in high culture or, the classics, the great books, that kind of thing. They're more obsessed with rock music, those kids and their rock and roll music. And he posits that this represents a degeneration from the prior mentality of previous generations of American students. And then in the second section, Nihilism, American Style. And this section, I would say, is probably the one that I found to be of most interest. Bloom asserts that the adoption in academia of certain philosophical strains from Europe, specifically from Germany, serve to corrupt the institutions of higher learning in this country by inculcating them with what he calls value relativism, or what you might say is like cultural relativism and moral relativism, which Bloom asserts has crippled the ability of the average American student to think critically, and is basically just kind of fostering an atmosphere of like nihilism in these universities, in which he asserts eventually led to the adoption of like what we might now refer to as like identity politics and different kind of like social justice crusades and stuff, which undermine the true function of the university. And then in the third section, he talks about, in the third section entitled The University, he talks about how he views the modern American university as having basically failed in its mandate. It has been corrupted, ideologically subverted in some ways, and again is now more concerned with like promoting right think rather than like critical thinking. And by that I mean, or he would mean, such things as like affirmative action, diversity quotas, that kind of thing. And I have to say, that has only gotten exponentially worse since this book's publication. But anyway, that's the long and short of the book, as best I can give it. So let's talk about now my reaction to the book. So this is a book that I can sympathize with because I think that its main thesis does carry weight. I mean, we all know that universities in America now are, in many instances, little more than centers for indoctrination. And like I say, things have only gotten so much exponentially worse since this book was published. So I am sympathetic to, Bloom's main point of contention here, that higher education is failing the youth of America because it's no longer like, serving the proper function of, fostering, critical thinking abilities and, the pursuit of truth. It's no longer about that. It's more about the pursuit of, ideologically popular positions, right? So, like I say, this book is valuable, I think, because broadly speaking, its central thesis is valid, I think, and important, but it's not necessarily what it says that I dislike, but rather how it says it. So, just to be like perfectly, frank, I found this book to be incredibly rambling, kind of poorly structured, and honestly just kind of exhausting to read. This was honestly a slog. Bloom just seems to rant for page after page after page about Socrates and Plato and how institutions of higher learning nowadays are so hollow and vacuous compared to what they once were and what they should be. And like I get it, but honestly, I couldn't even follow sometimes in this book how what he was saying related to his main argument because it's just so freaking rambling. It's it's literally just like some old curmudgeon shaking his fist at some kids on his lawn. It feels like that at times. And I will say, on that note, this book is often considered to be kind of a part of the conservative intellectual tradition. And I don't really know if Allan Bloom ever revealed like his political affiliations, but I will say this book is heavily conservative, and I mean that in like the genuine like Burkean sense of the word. There is such value placed on tradition and heritage, such a strong reverence for high culture, and such an elitist tone, a nakedly elitist tone, which I can only imagine has the potential to be highly off putting to some readers. But this is definitely a very conservative book, and once again I mean that in like the genuine like Burkean sense of the word. But at times it just felt like once again some old codger angrily shaking his fist at the kids these days because they're not as he would have them be. And once again, I am sympathetic to his main thesis here. I think that it is largely valid, but some of the stuff that he says in this I just think is a little histrionic. Like in the first section, students, he goes into such a long disquisition about the adverse, or what he would say are the adverse effects of rock music. Again, those kids and their rock and roll music, and how this is basically just the end of culture because kids no longer listen to Bach and Chopin. They only listen to Mick Jagger, and Prince. Like it feels very, very out of touch in a way. And like, I am not by any means blind to the the potential for things that we take in, be that literature, film, or music, to alter us as people. Like, our art has real power. It definitely does. So I'm not totally averse to his sentiment that, what the kids listen to can have negative effects on their intellectual growth. And like I would say that there is a lot of music nowadays, definitely certain of the more hardcore types of like rap music that can be said to have had very negative effects on certain demographics. But his criteria for condemning rock music is that it's over sexualized and not as musically complex as like classical music. And like I would contest some of that. Like Alan Bloom apparently never listens to Cynic or Opeth because like those are some pretty like musically complex groups. They're some pretty musically complex tunes, I should say. I get the position that he's coming from, but again, some of it just feels histrionic and a little bit out of touch again. But once more, broadly speaking, I do agree or at least sympathize with Bloom's central thesis with this book. I mean, not only do I think higher education in America has failed the youth of this country, I just think American education overall has just failed the kids of this country in the most colossal way. I mean, it's, setting aside college for the moment, just getting there. I mean, you're having kids that are literally graduating high school that can't read, see spot, run, or add, two and two. Like it's incredibly alarming the level of degeneration that this country has seen in terms of its education. But yeah, so in general, I am sympathetic once more to Bloom's thesis here. But honestly, I just found the book so rambling, just so kind of in some ways unfocused, or at least it felt that way to me because I had trouble following some of his diatribes and how they connected with his overall argument. So I think, even though once again I can respect this book, I think a better book that I could recommend to read in lieu of The Closing of the American Mind, which deals with a lot of the same issues and is also concerned with tracing a certain intellectual degeneration, would probably be Stephen Hicks's Explaining Postmodernism. This is also concerned with, again, tracing the degeneration of Western and American, by extension, thought. And this is much more concise, much more focused. And I think this book does kind of a better job at doing at least some of what Allan Bloom was doing with The Closing of the American Mind. So, yeah, if you've read this or if you're considering reading this, I would actually recommend reading instead Stephen Hicks's Explaining Postmodernism. But that aside, I don't rate books such as this. But once more, it's a work that I can respect, but I didn't really enjoy by and large. But anyway, so The Closing of the American Mind by Allan Bloom. Have you read this book? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you agreed or disagreed with it, or with what I've said about it here today. And if you haven't read The Closing of the American Mind, again, I think there are better books out there that deal with this kind of thing, that do so in a more succinct fashion than the kind of just rambling discourse that Bloom offers in this book. But you might want to pick this up. I mean, it can perhaps be revelatory, I suppose, and also it's written from an insider's perspective because, again, Bloom was himself a professor, so he kind of witnessed this corruption and degradation of the American university from the inside. So perhaps there is some real merit to reading this book, even still. But as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.